Chicago, October 15, 2024. The sky blazed crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked sidewalks of Englewood. Marcus Hayes and his wife, Angela, stepped off the number 20 bus, their breaths faintly visible in the cool autumn air. The street pulsed with the distant hum of traffic, interwoven with the soft chirp of crickets hiding in the sparse grass along the curb. Angela, a nurse at St. Bernard Hospital, shifted the strap of her work bag, her scrub slightly creased from a grueling 12-hour shift. Her dark eyes caught the fading light as she offered Marcus a weary but warm smile. "Tell me again why I keep signing up for double shifts on Fridays," she teased, her voice soft yet vibrant, carrying the familiar warmth that always grounded Marcus. He chuckled, his broad shoulders easing as he nudged her gently. "Because you're the best person I know, and Mrs. Carter's war story has guilt you into it every time." Angela rolled her eyes, but her laugh was bright, cutting through the fatigue of the day like a ray of sunlight through clouds. They walked side by side, their steps sensing naturally, hands brushing occasionally as they navigated the uneven pavement. The neighborhood was hushed, save for the rustle of oak leaves overhead and the distant bark of a dog behind a chain-link fence. Their apartment lay 3 blocks away, a modest 2-bedroom with creaky floors and a kitchen that always held the faint aroma of Angela's morning coffee. Marcus, a former military tech specialist now working as a civilian engineer, cherished these walks. There were moments when the world slowed, when he could feel the steady rhythm of their life together, simple, solid, unbreakable. Angela adjusted her bag again, her sneakers scuffing lightly against the ground. "Next time Mrs. Carter starts with her back in 68 tails, you're faking a cough and dragging me home," she said, her tone playful but tinged with exhaustion. Marcus grinned, his fingers grazing hers. "Deal. I'll even throw in some dramatic wheezing for effect." At 6:50 p.m., they turned onto a quieter street where ancient oaks leaned over the road, their branches casting intricate patterns of shadow that danced in the dimming light. The air carried the scent of damp earth and the faint tang of grilled meat wafting from a nearby backyard. A few kids pedaled bikes in lazy circles at the block's end, their laughter drifting on the breeze. Marcus glanced at Angela, her profile softened by the glow of a street lamp flickering to life. He was about to suggest takeout for dinner when the low growl of an engine cut through his thoughts. A police cruiser rounded the corner, its tires crunching on loose gravel, moving slower than necessary. Marcus's stomach tightened, an instinct sharpened by years in a city where such encounters could mean nothing or everything. The cruiser eased alongside them, headlights off, the driver's silhouette stark against the dashboard's glow. Officer Brian Kessler, a white man with a square jaw, leaned out the window, his face half-lit. "Evening," he said, his voice flat, eyes fixed on Angela. "Can I see your ID, ma'am?" Angela paused, her brow creasing. "Is something wrong, officer?" she asked, her tone steady but cautious, the same voice she used to soothe agitated patients. Marcus stepped closer, his hand hovering near her elbow. "We're just walking home, sir. My wife's a nurse, just off her shift." Kessler's gaze didn't waver, his fingers tapping the doorframe in a slow, deliberate rhythm. "ID, now," he repeated, his voice sharper, cutting through the evening's calm. Angela hesitated, her hand resting on her bag. "I don't have it on me, officer. I just got off work." Marcus felt a pressure building in his chest, his pulse quickening. "She's not carrying anything but her work bag," he said, keeping his tone even. "We lived a blocks from here." At 6:58 p.m., the cruiser's door creaked open, the sound piercing the quiet street like a warning. Kessler stepped out, his boots hitting the pavement with a heavy thud, his hand resting too close to the holster on his belt. His eyes raked over Angela, a look that made Marcus's skin prickle, cold and invasive. "You refusing to comply?" Kessler asked, his voice low, almost predatory. Angela took a small step back, her hands raised slightly. "No, sir, I'm not refusing. I just don't understand what we did." Marcus raised his palms, his heart hammering, loud enough to drown out the crickets. "Officer, please, we don't want trouble. Let's keep this calm." Kessler's lips twitched, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Before Marcus could react, the officer lunged, seizing Angela's wrist and twisting her arm behind her back. She gasped, stumbling as her bag slipped to the ground, spilling pens, a water bottle, and a small notebook across the sidewalk. "Don't touch her," Marcus shouted, stepping forward. But Kessler's other hand was already on his gun, the barrel glinting as it swung toward Marcus. "Back up," Kessler snapped, his voice jagged with something anger, fear, or both. Angela's face pressed against the cruiser's hood, the metal warm from the day's heat, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "I'm not resisting," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "I just want to go home." Kessler ignored her, his knee pressing into her back as he snapped cuffs around her wrists, the metallic click echoing in the stillness. Marcus's hands trembled, raised high, his mind scrambling for words to halt the escalating nightmare. "Please, she's not a threat. Just let her go." At 7:02 p.m., the world shattered. A single gunshot ripped through the air, sharp and final, like the snap of a breaking branch. Angela's body went limp, sliding off the hood to the pavement. Her cuffed hands twisted behind her, blood pooling beneath her chest, dark and spreading fast. Marcus dropped to his knees, a scream trapped in his throat, his hands reaching for her but halted by the gun now pointed at his face. "Stay down," Kessler shouted, his voice unsteady, his eyes wide with something that wasn't remorse. The blood trailed toward the gutter, a thin, relentless stream marking the boundary between life and its absence. Marcus stared at Angela's face, her eyes open but unseeing, her lips parted as if she'd been about to speak one last time. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint and useless, too far to matter. Kessler backed away, his gun still raised, muttering about resistance. His words swallowed by the roar in Marcus's ears. By 7:15 p.m., the street was a kaleidoscope of flashing lights, blue and red painting the faces of neighbors peering from behind curtains. More officers arrived, their radios crackling with clipped codes Marcus couldn't process. They cuffed him, too, their hands rough but mechanical, as if this were routine. He sat on the curb, his shoes inches from the bloodstain, his body numb, his eyes fixed on the spot where Angela lay, now covered by a white sheet that couldn't conceal the truth. Questions came. Where were you going? What did she say? Why didn't she comply? But Marcus didn't answer. His voice was gone, buried beneath the weight of loss. They asked him to wait, to sit, to stay calm, as if calm were possible when his world had been ripped apart. The days that followed were a fog of grief and disbelief. Marcus moved through the motion signing funeral home paperwork, fielding calls from Angela's co-workers, nodding blankly at condolences that felt hollow. Their apartment became a mausoleum, every corner holding a fragment of her, the scarf draped over the couch, the half-empty coffee pot, the post-it note on the fridge reading, "Don't forget milk. Love you." He couldn't touch them, couldn't bear to erase her presence. At night, he sat on the edge of their bed, staring at her pillow, still fluffed the way she liked it, as if she might walk through the door and slip beneath the covers. Sleep was a stranger, replaced by memories of her laugh, her touch, the way she'd hum while cooking, filling the kitchen with life. On October 22, 2024, the courthouse stood like a monolith, its marble floors cold and unyielding under Marcus's polished shoes. He wore a black suit, the one from their wedding 5 years earlier, now carrying the faint scent of mothballs and Angela's lavender ironing spray. The courtroom was packed but silent, the air thick with anticipation and indifference. Kessler sat at the defense table, his uniform swapped for an ill-fitting suit, his face blank, as if waiting for a delayed flight rather than a verdict on a life. Lawyers shuffled papers, their voices low and clipped, while the judge, a woman with graying hair pulled tight, scanned the room with a detached gaze. Marcus sat in the back row, his hands clenched on his knees, the suit's fabric stiff against his skin. The benches were hard, polished to a shine that reflected the fluorescent lights in blurred streaks, but he didn't shift, didn't fidget, as if moving might let the pain spill out uncontrollably. The trial was a parade of half-truths. Witnesses spoke in measured tones, their words carefully chosen to align with department policy. The body cam footage, grainy and incomplete, showed Angela's final moments, but conveniently cut off before the shot. The prosecutor's questions were soft, almost apologetic, while Kessler's lawyer painted Angela as non-compliant, a threat by omission. Marcus's chest burned with each word, but he stayed silent, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Kessler, who never once looked his way. The jury, a mix of tired faces, listened with varying degrees of attention, some scribbling notes, others staring blankly ahead. At 11:47 a.m., the foreman stood, A man in his 60s with a stiff tie and a hollow expression. We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty on all counts. The use of force was justified under department policy. The words hit Marcus like a slow, cold wave, not sudden, but suffocating, seeping into every corner of his being. There was no gasp from the gallery, no outcry, just a faint rustle of papers and a cough from someone in the front. Kessler nodded once, his lawyer giving him a brief pat on the shoulder. Marcus didn't move, his heartbeat fading into a dull static. Justified. The word echoed in his skull, hollow and relentless, like a bell struck wrong. Angela had been shot with her hands cuffed, unarmed, begging to go home. And somehow the law had wrapped its arms around her killer. It wasn't that no one cared, it was that they did, and still chose this. Outside, reporters swarmed like vultures. Microphones thrust forward, questions fired without pause. How do you feel about the verdict? Will you appeal? Was race a factor? Marcus walked through them like a ghost, eyes on the pavement, each crack sharper beneath his shoes. He didn't go home. He walked for miles, past the diner where Angela loved the cherry pie, past the park where they'd shared ice cream on warm summer nights. The city blurring into a haze of memory and loss. That night, Marcus sat in their living room, the silence deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. He stared at a faded photo on the wall. Angela at the state fair, cotton candy in hand, her eyes squinting with joy under the summer sun. The pain was a weight he couldn't shift, a stone lodged in his chest. He rose and walked to their bedroom, pausing at the threshold, the door creaking as he pushed it open. Her side of the bed was untouched, the blanket folded neatly, the pillow still fluffed. He sat on the edge, his hands trembling as he opened the top drawer of her dresser. Her hospital badge lay there, next to her lip balm and the silver locket he'd given her their first Christmas. But beneath a stack of folded scrubs, he found something else, a worn leather journal, its edges frayed, tucked away like a secret. His hand shook as he opened it, Angela's neat handwriting filling the pages. The early entries were mundane, grocery lists, notes about patients, plans for their next anniversary. But as he flipped further, the tone shifted. She wrote about uneasy encounters outside the hospital, about feeling watched during late shifts, about comments that lingered like threats. One entry, dated September 28, 2024, stopped his breath. Kessler was in there again tonight. He stood by the exit, just staring. I think he knows where I park. I told security, but they said not to stir things up. I'm scared, but I don't want Marcus to worry. Marcus read it again, the words blurring as his eyes burned. Kessler. She'd known him. She'd feared him. This wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. It had been building, and no one had listened. He stood abruptly, the journal clutched in his hand, his chest heaving. Why hadn't she told him more? Why hadn't the hospital done something? The questions churned, each one a fresh cut. He opened his laptop, fingers moving with a purpose he hadn't felt since his military days. As a tech specialist, he'd once made networks sing, cracking systems to protect soldiers in the field. Now, he turned those skills to a new war. He began searching police misconduct databases, internal personnel records, and news archives. Angela's journal provided names, dates, times, and a map of fears she'd drawn in secret. He found complaints against Kessler, all dismissed, buried under vague resolutions. A pattern emerged. Black residents ignored allegations, closed cases. By 3:14 a.m., his screen glowed with data, timelines, and connections. The more he uncovered, the clearer it became Kessler wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a system designed to protect its own. Marcus leaned back, his breath shallow. This wasn't just about Kessler. It was about the supervisors who sign off, the reports that vanished, the silences that let men like him walk free. He found a reference to a deleted security video from the hospital, mentioned in an internal memo, but missing from the trial evidence. It took hours, but he traced a backup on a cloud server the hospital hadn't fully scrubbed. The footage was grainy, timestamped September 20th, 2024, 11:43 p.m. It showed Kessler lingering near Angela's car in the hospital lot, his hand on his holster, his voice low as he spoke to her. You keep running that mouth, nurse, and we'll see how far it gets you. Angela's face was tense, her steps hurried as she backed away. The video cut off, but it was enough. Marcus's hand stopped trembling. Something colder, sharper, took root. He spent the next days in a fever of focus, barely eating, barely sleeping. He cross-referenced Angela's journal with public records, piecing together a timeline of Kessler's actions. There were others: Jamal Carter, a teenager with a broken wrist from a routine stop; Maria Ellis, a mother tasting her driveway; Daniel Reed, a college student whose complaint of harassment vanished without a trace. Each name was a thread, each thread part of a larger web. Marcus hacked into the police department's internal server using an old exploit he learned. In the military, the system was outdated, vulnerable, and he moved through it like a shadow, downloading personnel files, internal memos, and redacted complaints. One memo stood out. Officer Kessler advised to avoid repeat interactions with complainant A. Walton. No further action required. It was dated the days before her death. By October 29, 2024. Marcus's dining table was a map of evidence printouts, USB drives. Angela's journal opened to the page that named her fear. He lit a candle beside her photo, the one where she smiled with cotton candy at the fair. "I see it now, Angela," he whispered. "All of it. I won't let them bury you again." The grief was still there, raw and unrelenting, but it had a purpose now. He wasn't a soldier anymore, not a husband, not even a man in the way he used to be. He was a fuse, lit and burning, ready to ignite something the system couldn't ignore. Marcus stood, his shadow long against the wall, and began a plan. He would start with Kessler, but he wouldn't stop there. The truth was his weapon, and he would wield it until the silence broke. Chicago, November 3, 2024, 4:37 a.m. The city lay under a shroud of gray clouds, the kind that hung low and heavy, promising rain, but holding back, as if the sky itself was too tired to weep. Marcus Hayes sat hunched over his laptop in the dim glow of his apartment, the only light coming from the screen and a single candle flickering beside Angela's photo. Her smile, frozen in that State Fair snapshot, seemed to watch him as he typed, his fingers moving with a precision born of years cracking military networks. "They think they can bury the truth," he muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll dig it up, piece by piece." The apartment was silent, save for the faint hum of the computer fan and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling in. The night, the weight of Angela's absence pressed against him, but it was no longer just grief, it was fuel. A quiet fire driving him deeper into the digital labyrinth of the Chicago Police Department's servers. Marcus had spent the last week building a fortress of evidence, each file a brick in the wall he was constructing against the system that had taken his wife. Angela's journal lay open beside him, its pages marked with highlighters and sticky notes. Her neat handwriting a roadmap to the truth, the names, dates, and incidents she'd recorded: Kessler's lingering stares, his veiled threats outside. The hospital had led Marcus to a trove of buried complaints, redacted memos, and deleted footage. But it wasn't enough. Kessler was a symptom, not the disease. The real rot lay higher, in the supervisors who signed off on his actions, the internal affairs officers who looked the other way, the system that shielded its own while leaving blood on the sidewalks. Marcus knew he was walking a dangerous line, but he crossed it the moment he saw Angela's body crumple to the pavement. There was no going back. At 5:12 a.m., his screen flashed with a new download: internal emails from the CPD's Personnel Division, dated 2023 to 2024. He breached their firewall using a backdoor he'd crafted from an old military exploit, a trick he'd learned in a desert base when systems went down faster than soldiers could react. The emails were a gold mine, revealing a pattern of dismissed complaints against Kessler and others, all stamped with the same vague resolution: incident deemed within procedural discretion. One email, sent by a Lieutenant Harold Vance, caught Marcus's eye. It was addressed to an internal affairs supervisor, dated October 10, 2024. 5 days before Angela's death, Kessler's been flagged again. Same nurse, same parking lot issue, advised verbal warning, no paper trail. "We don't need another PR mess." Marcus's jaw tightened, his fingers pausing on the keyboard. They'd known Kessler was targeting Angela, and they'd chosen to protect him. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes, the weight of the discovery settling like a stone in his chest. The candle's flame danced, casting fleeting shadows across Angela's photo. He could almost hear her voice, soft and steady, telling him to keep going, to not let them win. Marcus opened a new tab and began cross-referencing Vance's name. with other files. The lieutenant appeared in dozens of documents approvals for closed investigations, emails dismissing civilian complaints, even a commendation for maintaining department morale. But one file stood out, a restricted subfolder, labeled Community Oversight Protocols. Inside were reports detailing a coordinated effort to suppress complaints in Englewood and other low-income neighborhoods, with directives to prioritize officer safety over civilian accountability. The language was clinical, bureaucratic, but the intent was clear: keep the noise down, keep the badges clean, no matter the cost. By 7:45 a.m., the first rays of dawn crept through the blinds, painting the room in muted gold. Marcus hadn't slept, but his mind was sharp, fueled by coffee and purpose. He copied the files to an encrypted USB drive, then wiped his digital tracks using a custom script he coded years ago. The police server logs would show no trace of his intrusion, no hint that he'd been there, but the data was his now, a weapon waiting to be wielded. He stood, stretching limbs stiff from hours of sitting, and glanced at the clock. He had a meeting at 9 a.m. with Sarah Nguyen, a freelance journalist who'd made a name for herself exposing City Hall corruption. She'd agreed to meet after Marcus sent her an anonymous tip about systemic issues in the CPD, though he hadn't shared the full scope of what he'd found. He needed someone with a platform, someone who could amplify the truth without being silenced. At 8:30 a.m., Marcus stepped out into the crisp morning air, his breath visible as he walked to a small coffee shop in Pilsen, a neutral ground far from Englewood's watchful eyes. He wore a plain gray hoodie and jeans. Blending into the crowd of early commuters, the city was waking up. Buses hissed to a stop. Vendors set up carts, and the L train rumbled overhead. But Marcus felt detached, as if he were moving through a world that no longer belonged to him. The coffee shop was tucked between a bookstore and a taqueria, its windows fogged with condensation. Sarah was already there, seated in a corner booth, her laptop open and a cup of black coffee steaming in front of her. She was in her early 30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun. "You're the guy from the email," she said as Marcus slid into the booth, her voice low but direct. "What's this about?" Marcus didn't waste time. He slid a USB drive across the table, wrapped in a folded napkin. "Everything you need is on there," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Complaints, emails, deleted footage. It's about my wife, Angela Hayes. She was killed by an officer named Brian Kessler on October 15th. The trial called it justified, but it wasn't. She was targeted, and the department covered it up." Sarah's eyes narrowed, but she didn't interrupt. She took the drive, her fingers brushing the napkin as she tucked it into her bag. "Why me?" she asked. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Because you've taken on the city before and didn't back down. I need someone who won't." For the next hour, Marcus laid out the basic Los Angeles Journal, the hospital footage, the emails linking Kessler to a broader pattern of misconduct. Sarah listened, her expression unreadable, but her pen moved quickly, jotting notes on a legal pad. "This is big," she said finally, her voice low, "but it's dangerous. You're not just going after one cop, you're taking on the whole system." "They'll come for you," Marcus nodded, his jaw tight. "They already have." He didn't tell her about the anonymous text he received the night before. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like her." The words had chilled him, but they'd also hardened his resolve. Sarah agreed to review the files and meet again in 2 days. "If this checks out," she said, "we'll need a plan to get it out there without getting you killed." By November 5th, 2024, Marcus was back in his apartment, the walls closing in as he worked. The anonymous threat had been followed by a second one, this time a voicemail left at 2:13 a.m. "You don't know what you're messing with, Hayes. Walk away." The voice was distorted, but Marcus recognized the cadence of someone used to giving orders. He saved the message, adding it to his growing archive. His laptop screen glowed with new findings. Kessler wasn't acting alone. Lieutenant Vance was part of a tight-knit group of senior officers who'd been flagged in multiple complaints, but never disciplined. Marcus found a leaked memo from 2022, buried in an old server archive, outlining a proactive policing strategy that targeted high-risk neighborhoods like Englewood with aggressive stops and minimal oversight. The memo was signed by Vance and to others, Captain Ellen Morrow and Deputy Chief Raymond Holt. Their names appeared again and again, shielding officers like Kessler from accountability. At 3:47 p.m., Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Files are legit. Found more on Vance connected to a federal grant for community safety. Meet me tonight, 8 p.m., same spot. Marcus felt a flicker of hope, but it was tempered by caution. He knew the risks were growing. That evening, he took a circuitous route to the coffee shop. Doubling back through alleys and switching buses to shake any tails, the city felt different now. Its streets sharper, its shadows deeper. He arrived at 7:55 p.m., scanning the room before, spotting Sarah in the same booth, her laptop closed this time, a manila folder in its place. She didn't smile as he sat down. "You're in deep," she said, sliding the folder toward him. Vance isn't just a bad apple, he's part of a network. They're funneling federal money into off-the-books operations, using training as a cover to justify excessive force. Your wife wasn't the first, and she won't be the last unless we blow this open. The folder contained printouts of financial records, grant applications, and internal communications. One document detailed a $2.3 million grant awarded to the CPD in 2023 for community engagement, but the funds were redirected to equipment purchases and overtime for a select group of officers, including Kessler. Sarah had cross-referenced the names with Marcus's files, uncovering a pattern of complaints dismissed by the same trio, Vance, Morrow, and Holt. "They're protecting their own," Sarah said, her voice tight, "and they're good at it. But this," she tapped the USB drive, "this could break them." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. He'd expected corruption, but not on this scale. It wasn't just about Kessler anymore, it was about a machine that chewed up lives and spit out excuses. At 9:30 p.m., as they left the coffee shop, Marcus noticed a black SUV parked across the street, its engine idling, windows tinted to dark. To see inside, his pulse quickened, but he kept his pace steady, walking with Sarah toward the L station. "Don't look," he murmured, his hand brushing her arm. She nodded, her steps calm but deliberate. They parted ways at the platform, Sarah heading north, Marcus south. He didn't relax until he was back in his apartment, the deadbolt locked, the curtains drawn. At 11:14 p.m., his phone lit up with another text. "Last warning, drop it, or your sister's next." Marcus's blood ran cold. His sister, Lena, lived in Hyde Park with her two kids, unaware of the storm he'd stirred. He called her immediately, urging her to stay with a friend for a few days without explaining why. Her voice was confused but trusting, as she agreed to leave that night. By November 7, 2024, Marcus was running on fumes, his body sustained by coffee and adrenaline. He'd moved his operation to a cheap motel on the city's edge, paying cash to avoid a paper trail. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and mildew, but it was secure, with no cameras and a clerk who didn't ask questions. He set up his laptop on a wobbly desk, the glow illuminating his tired face. Sarah had sent him a new batch of files, including audio from a whistleblower, a former CPD officer named James Carter, who'd retired in 2023 after a decade on the force. The audio was grainy, recorded on a hidden device during a meeting with Vance and Morrow. "We don't need another lawsuit," Vance's voice said, low and irritated. "Kessler's a loose cannon, but he gets results. Just keep the complaints off the books." Carter's voice followed, hesitant. "What about the nurse? She's filing reports." Morrow's reply was cold. "Handle it. Make her feel watched. She'll stop." Marcus played the audio again, his hands clenched into fists. Angela had been a target, not a random victim. They'd known she was documenting Kessler's harassment, and they'd let him escalate until she was dead. The realization was a knife in his gut, but it sharpened his focus. He spent the day cross-referencing Carter's audio with Angela's journal, building a timeline that linked Kessler's actions to specific orders from Vance and Morrow. By 6:20 p.m., he'd compiled a dossier: mails, audio, video, and financial records that painted a damning picture of a department rotten at its core. He encrypted the files and sent a copy to Sarah, with instructions to hold off on publishing until they had a plan to protect themselves. At 8:47 p.m., Marcus stepped out of the motel to clear his head, the night air sharp against his skin. The parking lot was empty, save for a flickering street lamp casting jagged shadows. He walked to a nearby gas station, grabbing a soda and scanning the lot for anything out of place. As he turned back, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a dark jacket, face obscured by a baseball cap. "Hayes," the man said, his voice low, unfamiliar. Marcus froze, his hand tightening around the soda can. "You've got one chance to walk away," the man continued, stepping closer. "You don't know who you're messing with." Marcus held his ground, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his veins. "I know exactly who I'm messing with, and they're going to answer for it." The man didn't move, but his hand twitched toward his waist. Marcus braced himself, ready to run, but the man turned and vanished into the darkness. Back in the motel, Marcus's heart pounded as he checked the locks and drew the curtains tighter. The encounter had shaken him, but it also clarified something. They were scared. He was getting close, too close for them to ignore. At 11:03 p.m., his phone buzzed with a new message from Sarah. "Found a contact at the Tribune. They're interested, but they want more. Can you get into the city's financial records?" Marcus hesitated. Hacking City Hall was a bigger risk than hacking the CPD servers, with tighter security and federal oversight, but the financial records could tie Vance's group to the grant money, proving their corruption went beyond negligence to outright fraud. He replied, "I'll try. Give me 48 hours." On November 9, 2024, Marcus slipped into the city's records office, a nondescript building tucked behind a coffee shop in a DMV branch. He wore maintenance overalls and carried a toolbox he'd bought at a thrift store, blending in as just another worker. The office was quiet, the clerks distracted by their phones or paperwork. Marcus nodded to a woman at the front desk, who barely glanced up, and took the elevator to the sub-basement, where the servers hummed in a cool, windowless room. He used a custom device, a credit card-sized override he built in his military days to bypass the keypad lock, stepping inside at 10:17 a.m. The room was a maze of hard drives and cables, the air thick with the scent of metal and ozone. He moved quickly, locating the financial archives and plugging in his USB drive. The system was old, poorly patched, and he navigated it with ease, downloading ledgers and grant reports from 2022 to 2024. One file confirmed Sarah's suspicions. $1.8 million of the community safety grant had been funneled to a private security firm owned by a cousin of Deputy Chief Holt. The firm's invoices were vague, listing consulting services that never materialized. At 10:43 a.m., an alarm pinged softly on the terminal. Someone had noticed an unauthorized login. Marcus disconnected, wiped his traces, and slipped out, his heart racing but his movements calm. He was back at the motel by noon, uploading the new files to Sarah, but at 2:14 p.m., his world tilted. A small explosion rocked the motel parking lot, shattering the windows of his rental car. Glass sprayed across the asphalt, and smoke curled into the sky. Marcus ducked behind the bed, his pulse pounding, but no one came. The blast was a warning, not an attack. He grabbed his laptop and the USB drives, stuffing them into a backpack, and fled to a new hideout, a friend's garage in Bronzeville, where he could work in peace. By November 10, 2024, Marcus and Sarah had a plan. The evidence was overwhelming: emails, audio, video, financial records, and Angela's journal, all pointing to a conspiracy that reached the CPD's highest ranks. Sarah had secured a meeting with the Tribune editor, but they needed one more piece: a direct link to Kessler's actions on the night of Angela's death. Marcus spent the day scouring the hospital's backup servers, finding a second video from a different angle. Timestamp October 15, 2024, 6:59 p.m. It showed Kessler's cruiser circling the block, twice before stopping, as if he'd been waiting for Angela. The footage was clear. She hadn't resisted, hadn't moved quickly, hadn't done anything but stand there, confused and afraid. Marcus's hand shook as he watched, but he saved the file, knowing it was the final nail. At 7:20 p.m., Marcus met Sarah at a diner off the highway, a quiet spot where the coffee was too strong and the booth sticky with grease. They reviewed the dossier, finalizing their strategy. "We go public tomorrow," Sarah said, her voice firm. "The Tribune will run the story, and I've got contacts at the national outlets ready to amplify it, but you need to disappear after this. They'll come for you." Marcus nodded, his eyes on the folder. "I'm not running," he said. "Not until they say her name." Sarah didn't argue, but her expression was grim. As they left, Marcus noticed the same black SUV from days earlier, parked across the lot. He memorized the plate number, his mind already planning his next move. That night, back in the garage, Marcus lit another candle beside Angela's photo. "I need you to keep me steady, Angela," he whispered. Because what I'm about to do, I can't come back from. He didn't sleep, didn't try. Instead, he finalized the dossier, tagging every name, every lie, every cover-up. Vance, Morrow, Holt, Kessler. They built a house of cards, and he was ready to knock it down. At 3:47 a.m., November 11, 2024, he sent the files to Sarah with a single message: do it. The truth was out of his hands now, but it was alive, unstoppable, and it would burn through the city like wildfire. Marcus leaned back, the candles, glow flickering across his face, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something shift. Not peace, not victory, but a quiet, unshakable resolve. The war in the shadows was over. The light was coming. Chicago, November 12, 2024, 7:13 p.m. Grant Park glowed under the soft flicker of hundreds of candles, their flames trembling in the cool evening breeze, casting a warm, defiant light across the pavement. Names were scrawled in chalk along the sidewalks: Angela Hayes, Jamal Carter, Maria Ellis, Daniel Reed, each one a wound, each one a demand. Marcus Hayes stood in the shadows of a maple tree, its leaves just beginning to turn, the faint red of early autumn, watching the crowd gather. They weren't shouting, not yet, but their presence was a roar in itself, a collective refusal to let the silence win. Angela Hayes, a woman's voice called out, strong and clear, and the crowd echoed, Angela Hayes. The chant grew, steady and unrelenting, weaving through the park like a pulse. Marcus's chest tightened, not with grief now, but with something heavier, something closer to purpose. The truth he clawed from the shadows was out, spreading through the city like ink and water. And tonight, it was taking shape in the voices of strangers who refused to forget. The Tribune had published the story at 6 a.m. A front page exposed headline: blood and badges, the CPD's hidden war. Sarah Nguyen's byline was prominent, backed by Marcus's dossier mails, audio recordings, financial records, and the damning hospital video showing Officer Brian Kessler circling Angela's block. Before her death, the article laid bare a network of corruption within the Chicago Police Department, naming Lieutenant Harold Vance, Captain Ellen Morrow, and Deputy Chief Raymond Holt as architects of a system that buried complaints and protected officers like Kessler. By noon, the story had gone viral, shared across social media, picked up by national outlets, and debated in heated threads on X. Marcus had watched it unfold from a friend's garage in Bronzeville, his laptop screen glowing with live streams of protests forming outside City Hall. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate. The weight of Angela's absence was still there, a stone in his chest. But the chants in the park felt like her voice, amplified at last dot at 7:28 p.m. Marcus moved through the crowd, his hood up, blending into the sea of faces. Some held signs, justice for Angela, no more silence, while others clutched candles, their wax dripping onto the pavement. A young man with a megaphone stood on a makeshift platform, reading names from a list that stretched beyond Chicago, connecting local losses to a national litany of pain. Marcus paused near a group of women, their heads bowed in prayer, their murmurs blending with the wind. He recognized one of them, Mrs. Carter, Angela's supervisor at St. Bernard, her face lined with grief, but resolute. She didn't see him, but her presence was a reminder of why he'd started this. Angela had been more than a victim. She'd been a healer, a light, and her death had been a betrayal of everything she stood for. By 8:03 p.m., the crowd swelled to thousands, spilling onto Michigan Avenue, their candles a river of light against the darkening sky. The air smelled of wax and wet leaves, the city's pulse quickening as news trucks arrived, their cameras sweeping the scene. Marcus stayed on the edges, his hands in his pockets, fingers brushing the small USB drive that held a backup of everything he'd given Sarah. The Tribune story had only scratched the surface. There were more files, more names, more truths waiting to be unleashed if the system tried to push back. He'd sent a second copy to a civil rights attorney in D.C., a woman named Carla Evans, who'd already reached out to Sarah about filing a federal lawsuit. A third copy was with Maria Ellis's mother, a quiet woman who lost her daughter to Kessler's taser 2 years earlier. Marcus had met her the day before in a small church basement, her hands trembling as she took the drive. Make them pay, she'd whispered, her voice raw but steady. At 8:27 p.m., a ripple ran through the crowd as the mayor appeared on a temporary stage, flanked by the police chief and a team of aides. The mayor, A woman in her 50s with a practiced smile raised her hands for quiet, but the chants only grew louder. Say her name, Angela Hayes, the chief. A broad-shouldered man named Paul Grayson stepped to the microphone, his face tight, his eyes scanning the crowd. We take these allegations seriously, he began, reading from a prepared statement, his voice flat. The department is cooperating fully with the Department of Justice to investigate these claims. A shout cut through the air. You investigated her death and called it justified. Another voice joined. Sharper, you knew about Kessler. The crowd surged forward, not violently, but unyielding, their candles held high like torches. Grayson folded his statement, his shoulders sagging, and for a moment, he looked like a man standing in the ruins of his authority. We are committed to transparency, he said, unscripted now, his voice faltering. We will address any misconduct. The crowd didn't applaud, didn't cheer, just watched, their silence louder than any protest. Marcus slipped away as the mayor took the stage, her promises of reform drowned out by the crowd's chants. He walked north, toward the lake, the city's skyline looming against the night. At 9:14 p.m., his phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. Doy is moving in, Vance and Morrow suspended. Kessler is under house arrest. Keep your head down. Marcus didn't reply, but a weight lifted slightly, not enough to erase the pain, but enough to let him breathe. He stopped at a bench overlooking Lake Michigan, the water dark and restless under the moon. The air was cold, carrying the scent of algae and steel, and he sat, pulling Angela's stethoscope from his pocket. It was the one she kept by the bed, its rubber tubing worn from years of use. He held it gently, remembering how she pressed it to her chest after long shifts, saying, "Gotta make sure my heart's still in there." The memory stung, but it also anchored him, a reminder that this fight was hers as much as his. On November 13, 2024, the city woke to chaos. The Tribune's follow-up story detailed the financial trail Marcus had uncovered, linking the CPD's community safety grant to a private security firm owned by Holt's cousin. Protests grew, shutting down major intersections, with marchers carrying photos of Angela and others lost to police violence. Marcus watched from the garage, his laptop streaming live footage from X, where hashtags like #JusticeForAngela and #CPDExposed trended globally. At 10:47 a.m., a breaking news alert flashed. The Department of Justice had launched a formal investigation into the CPD, citing systemic patterns of discriminatory enforcement. Vance and Morrow were named in a federal indictment for obstruction of justice, while Kessler faced charges of manslaughter and evidence tampering. Marcus leaned back, his eyes heavy, not with triumph, but with exhaustion. This wasn't a victory, it was accountability. The first crack in a wall he'd spent weeks dismantling died at 1:20 p.m. Marcus received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered, his voice guarded. "Hayes, this is James Carter," the voice said. Low and gravelly, "I was with the CPD until 23. I gave Nian the audio. I've got more." Marcus's pulse quickened. Carter, the whistleblower, had been a ghost in his files, a name tied to the recording that exposed Vance and Morrow. "Why now?" Marcus asked. Carter's reply was heavy. "Because I saw what happened to your wife. I was there when they buried the complaints about Kessler. I stayed quiet till long. They arranged to meet at a diner outside the city, a place Carter swore was safe." Marcus packed his laptop and left, taking a bus to avoid being tracked, his eyes scanning every passenger for signs of danger. The diner was a relic, its neon sign flickering, the air inside thick with the smell of burnt coffee and greasy fries. Carter was already there, a weary man in his 40s, his face lined with regret. He slid a flash drive across the table, his hands steady, but his eyes darting to the door. "This is everything I kept," he said. Body cam audio, internal reports, even a memo from Holt about cleaning up Englewood. They knew Kessler was a problem, but he was their hammer. Marcus took the drive, his fingers brushing the cold metal. "Why didn't you come forward before?" he asked, not accusing, just needing to understand. Carter looked down, his voice barely audible. "I had a family. They threatened my pension, my safety. But your wife, she deserved better. I'm done hiding." By 4:56 p.m., Marcus was back in the garage, uploading Carter's files. The audio was raw, unfiltered. Kessler laughing about teaching lessons to civilians, Holt dismissing the complaint, As just noise, Morrow instructing officers to lose body cam footage. The memo was worse, a 2022 directive from Holt to neutralize repeat complainants in high-crime areas, with a list of names that included Angela's. Marcus's hand shook as he read it, the realization hitting like a physical blow. They marked her for death long before that night. He sent the files to Sarah and Carla Evans with a note, "This ends it," at 7:03 p.m. Sarah texted back, "Tribune's running it tomorrow. National networks are picking it up. Stay safe." Marcus. On November 14, 2024, the city erupted. The news story hit like a shockwave, detailing Holt's memo and Carter's audio, with ex-posts amplifying every detail. Protests swelled outside the CPD headquarters, where a makeshift memorial grew photos, flowers, and candles lining the steps. Marcus avoided the crowds, staying in the garage. But he watched the live streams, his heart heavy with the names being chanted. At 11:47 a.m., a federal judge ordered a full audit of the CPD, with oversight from the DOJ. Holt resigned that afternoon, his statement brief and unapologetic, citing personal reasons. Marcus didn't care about the resignation. He cared about the truth, now laid bare for the world to see. At 2:19 p.m., Marcus walked to a small church in Englewood, where Angela's funeral had been held. The pews were empty now, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and old hymnals. He sat in the second row, where he'd sat during her service, and opened her journal, rereading the entry from September 28th. Kessler was in there again. "I'm scared, but I don't want Marcus to worry." He closed his eyes, letting her words settle over him like a prayer. "I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner," he whispered, "but I'm making them listen now." He left the journal on the pew, a quiet offering, and walked out into the afternoon sun, the warmth a faint contrast to the cold Insabi November 15th, 2024. The city was a pressure cooker. The mayor announced a task force to reform the CPD, but the crowds outside City Hall were unsatisfied. Their signs demanded accountability, not promises. Marcus met Sarah at a park bench near the lake, the water gray and choppy under a cloudy sky. "You've changed everything," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But they're looking for you, Vance's people, maybe others. You need to lay low." Marcus nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "I'm not done," he said, "not until every name in that journal gets justice." Sarah handed him a burner phone. "Use this, Carlos. Filing the lawsuit next week. She wants you to testify." Marcus took the phone, his fingers brushing the stethoscope in his pocket. "I'll think about it," he said, but he already knew he'd say yes, not for himself, but for Angela, for the others, for the truth. Him. Asterisk at 6:33 p.m., Marcus returned to the garage, his laptop humming as he uploaded the final piece of evidence, a video he'd found on a civilian's phone, posted anonymously to a community forum. It showed Kessler shoving a teenager, Jamal Carter, into a wall during a 2023 stop, the boy's wrist snapping under the force. The video had been deleted from CPD records, but Marcus had recovered it, a final nail in Kessler's coffin. He sent it to Sarah, then leaned back, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy coat. The candle beside Angela's photo had burned low, its flame a faint pulse in the dark. He lit a new one, the light catching her smile, and whispered, "We're almost there, Angela. They can't hide anymore." On November 16, 2024, Marcus walked to Angela's grave at Oakwood Cemetery, the grass damp with morning dew. He knelt beside her headstone, tracing her name with his fingers, the stone cool under his touch. "I made them listen," he said, his voice steady. "I made them say your name." He placed a single white rose beside the headstone, its petals stark against the gray stone. As he stood, a boy approached, no older than 10, his mother trailing behind. "You're the man who made them tell the truth, right?" the boy asked, his voice clear and earnest. Marcus nodded, caught off guard. "My mom says your wife was a hero," the boy added. "She helped people." Marcus's throat tightened. "She did," he said. "Every day." The mother smiled, her eyes kind but heavy, and guided her son away. Marcus watched them go, the boy glancing back once, a spark of hope in his gaze. At 9:47 a.m., Marcus slipped into the CPD headquarters, the lobby quiet except for the hum of overhead lights and the faint scent of disinfectant. He wore a black wool coat, his face unmasked, his steps purposeful. The receptionist's chair was empty, the flag beside the department seal hanging still. Marcus walked past the front desk into the personnel wing and stopped outside the office labeled Internal Admin and Accords. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small paper bag inside a Kessler's badge, wrapped in red thread. It's brass dulled, but heavy with meaning. He placed it on the counter beside a stack of forms, along with a folded note. This one didn't fall. I took it. He turned and walked out, the glass door swinging shut behind him. The morning sun slanting through the windows, casting long lines of light across the floor. By noon, the badge was news. A janitor found it, the note photographed and shared on X. The hashtag CPD badge trending alongside hashtag Justice for Angela. The Tribune ran a follow-up, quoting the note and linking it to Marcus's campaign. The city buzzed with questions, with demands, with names no longer silenced. Marcus didn't watch the coverage. He sat in a park near the lake, the stethoscope in his hands, the wind carrying the faint sound of distant chants. Angela Hayes, they called, and he closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was a beginning. The silence had cracked, and the truth was speaking, loud and unshakable.